and jump on in here to the presentation of 3 questions every scientist should ask. Now, who am I and why am I here? So I'm the Vice President and CFO at Blueprint 1543. We're a company engaging sciences and theology to answer big questions. I'm a professional certified coach and also an author of a book my colleague Justin and I have just put out, Why Meet? How to Design and Run Purposeful Meetings, Workshops, and Conferences. So I'm interested both in the content area of a lot of what's being discussed at this conference, as well as how and why we do the different things we do, whether it's research, meetings, or conferences. Now, one of my main motivations in life really is to help others achieve their potential. And so that's what this workshop is going to be all about. How can we help you achieve your potential, whether you're a student or a professional? Now, the sciences are all about questions. Every researcher dedicates significant time to designing and refining their research questions. But why is that? It's because it's the questions that drive us intentionally forward towards possibilities and towards discoveries. So in this presentation, we're going to focus on what you can discover about yourself and how that applies to what you want to discover about the world through 3 questions. Now, just like in the lab, we're going to use a repeatable process, one that's easy to replicate in your life and in the lives of those around you. We'll use just 3 simple questions to hone and focus your own research on yourself. We'll discuss how these questions apply to college, career, life, and whatever stage you might be in. These questions will apply to you throughout. Now, after we're going to explore these questions, we're going to move into more of an interactive time. We're going to use the chat box to have a real conversation, perhaps even inviting you to unmute yourself and jump in so that we can see how these questions might help you gain momentum. Again, please feel free to use the chat box throughout. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So what are the questions? When we're thinking about life, education, research, or careers, it's easy to fall into what I might call the dot theory, the way of looking at the world that says, there's really only one thing that I'm supposed to do, and I simply have to find it. But what happens when we shift our mindset from a dot theory to more of a big picture purpose theory? So instead of asking, what's the thing that I should research? Or what's the thing that I should do? What's the thing that I should write about? What if we instead asked, who do I want to be? Now, in my role, I work a lot with grant development and research design. And in research and grant applications, there are often components called outputs and others called outcomes. Now, outputs, those are the things that you can control. It's what you deliver because you received funding to do so, such as designing and conducting an experiment, writing a manuscript with the results, and so on. But outcomes, those are what are outside your control. It's what you hope for. If that manuscript is actually published, if your work is picked up, replicated, or referenced by others. So what if we instead approached our lives as a set of outputs, focusing on the things that we know about and have some level of control over? That's where there's a lot greater flexibility on what a positive outcome might then be. But perhaps it's more common to focus on big, exciting outcomes, such as setting big goals, things that we strive for, whether that's a specific career, a specific job, a place to live, or even something more personal. These things then are like outcomes. We don't ultimately get to choose if we get the job. We don't choose the outcome in many of these areas in our life and in our work. So I'd like to propose that we shift our mindset from what should I do or what should I research to this bigger vision, bigger purpose, and then discover what opportunities can fit within that vision. Now, this might sound nice and lofty, but how does one actually achieve this? And what steps can we take to identify a purpose or a vision? And how do we figure that out? Now, I propose we do this through a series of questions, or perhaps a method of inquiry. So the three questions that I think every scientist should ask will shed light on the bigger picture, and then can be applied to multiple different areas of our lives and our research. So the first question, who am I? Now, this question can cover multiple categories of things that shape our identity, our social context, and our intellectual questions. What motivates me? Now, this might cover our motivational themes, such as I want to make an impact on the world around me. Or it can focus on larger intellectual questions, perhaps the problems you want to solve, the opportunities you want to see. Third, how do these two things work together? How do my answers shape my future from questions 1 and 2? Now, ideally, your answers to 1 and 2 are major driving forces then in how you shape your future and your research. When we're working in alignment, things tend to come easier and they're also more enjoyable. So let's start with who am I? Now, this question covers multiple categories of our identity. Your uniqueness, your character, your distinctiveness, perhaps what makes you distinct as a researcher among other researchers. Where do you come from and what matters to you? These are all areas that inform this sense then of identity. So to understand different aspects of your identity, we might describe different aspects of that, such as your personal identity. What describes you as a person? Are you an achiever? Are you a creative? Are you adventurous? Do you hope to have concrete goals, or do you prefer to live in the ideas? What about your family identity? Are you a daughter, a sister, a parent? How does that impact your work? Perhaps your religious identity. Are you a Christian, a Muslim, agnostic, an atheist? Perhaps your professional identity. Are you a student, a professor, a mentor? Perhaps there's groups that you identify with, such as being an artist or an athlete, a dancer, a foodie. Or maybe it's more skills-based. What are the skills that you have? Are you a leader, a mentor, a coach, an encourager? Your cultural identity also plays a role. I'm a West Coaster by birth, an American, married to an immigrant, someone raising a mixed race child. These are cultural areas that play into who we are. But perhaps we've got other parts of our identity. I'm curly haired and identify as a curly. I'm an extrovert, so extroverted it hurts sometimes. But perhaps you're introverted, perhaps you're tall, perhaps these things impact how you identify. Now, sometimes we're a little too close to ourselves and it can be difficult to identify some of these things. So it might be easier to think, how would your closest friends or your family describe you? But what about social context and how does that play into who you are? This is simply the people that we're surrounded by or in community with. Now, this means that it's our immediate, both social and physical environment. And this is important because it can influence how we perceive or understand things, but it also impacts how we want to be perceived or where we want to fit in. Our social context, then, we might consider who is your family, whether by birth or other? Where do you live? Where do you go to school or where do you teach? Where do you work? What disciplines are you a part of? What groups do you belong to by default? What groups do you belong to by choice? Who are your friends? Who are you trying to impress? We're all trying to impress someone, even if we won't admit it. So who are those people in those groups that we're trying to impress with our work or with ourselves? You may then ask yourself to figure out your social context. Who are the most important people in my life? Who are the most influential people in my life? Then compare what you notice about those lists. What qualities do these people have in common? What role do they play in your exploration of ideas and beliefs? How do they limit you or how do they launch you? And what role do you want these people to play in your life? We often give people power we don't intend to, simply because we want to impress them. Now, the second of the three questions is about your motivation. What's the why under what we do? Our motivations can be related to large, overarching themes, or perhaps more specific topical or intellectual questions. Now, there's a team of researchers led by Dr. Todd Henry who've developed what they call the Motivational Code. It's a series of themes of motivations that, when grouped together, capture what's underneath our drives. Said another way, these motivations explain why we do the things we do and why we research the things we research. Now, for example, if we speak of me personally, some of the things that I am motivated to do are to make an impact on the people, the teams, and the world around me, and to achieve potential, to find hidden, undeveloped, or unnoticed resources, whether that's within myself, other people around me, or in projects that I'm a part of. Now, understanding these core motivations then helps to explain the types of programs and the types of projects that I'm drawn to, and the types of people that I thrive being around. Figuring out what motivates us then really can be a big key to finding and articulating our bigger picture purpose in life, in our career, and in our research. Now, there might be other motivations that are simply topical or intellectual questions you're considering. So you might ask yourself, what topics do I always want to talk about? Perhaps even when those around you couldn't care less. What am I interested in when nobody else is? What questions do I have about the world or how something works, about people or about things? What intellectual puzzles, perhaps, do I want to solve? Our motivations help to reveal our why, the why we want to do the things we want to do, and why we care so deeply when we're doing them. So where does that take us? By answering, who am I and what motivates me, what do we learn? When we look at the answers to these sets of questions, it should start to give us insight into how we should be directing our efforts, whether personally or professionally. How do we want these to shape our future, and what will we enjoy? Now, often we've been trained to think about our future eligibility. Do I have the right background, the right degree, the right experience? These are the resume or CV builders. They're what make us look a certain way on paper. But these accomplishments are the outputs. They're the things that we've had control over. Now, there's an organizational psychology researcher, Dr. Dan Harrison, who's developed another way of looking at life and career, and I extend here to research. He makes the case that switching away from looking simply at eligibility, instead to look at suitability, or what are we suited for in a particular training, role, job, or career, will yield a much stronger and more sustainable result. Now, his theory of enjoyment performance, it says that when we do work that we enjoy, we do it more often. As we do it more often, that means we then get better at it. As we get better at it, we get noticed and we get accolades and we feel good about that. And because we're getting positive feedback, we then continue to do it more and we repeat that cycle. But the reverse is also true. When we don't enjoy a task or we're not good at it, we put it off. We procrastinate, or we simply don't do it. That means we don't improve. That means we're getting negative feedback, either from ourselves or from others, that we're not good at this, which makes us then want to do it even less. So suitability then, how much we would enjoy the work based on our individual characteristics, result in better engagement. And when we're actively engaged in our work, that just yields a better result. Said another way, it doesn't actually feel like work. It feels like play. So let's ask then, what is it that I am well suited for? What activities, what research, what jobs would I enjoy? These are all clues that can keep us engaged over the long term. It also seems true that when we enjoy things that are matched up with who we are and with our motivations and big questions, we'll get better results. So how do we apply this to real life? How do we turn then what we've just discussed into tangible action steps? Let's consider then those students that might be in the room here. How might this apply to college, either the selection of college itself or to majors, minors, courses you should take, things that you should be involved in? Let's consider those three questions then in light of college majors or areas of study. Who am I? As we look at our personal and unique skills, abilities, and characteristics that define you, you might start to think, am I good with people? These are some examples. Or do I care about people? Or do I more care about things? Do I care about ideas? Am I hands-on? Do I want to do the work myself? Or would I prefer to just simply think about the work? Am I then good at analyzing? Am I good at finding patterns? Or perhaps I'm good at communicating. So then we look to question 2 and what motivates you? What is underlying in your drives? Is it to discover the unknown? Is it to research and make intellectual contributions? Is it to improve the daily lives of real people? Is it to improve the lives of animals? Is it to help? Is it to teach or to otherwise share? Now, depending on how you answer these first 2 questions, we start to get a unique picture of how you should shape those college choices. For example, for those who care about people, they're highly intellectual and into ideas, and are good at finding patterns, those may then be really good researchers in the human sciences, whether that takes a medical area or a psychological science focus. But perhaps someone who's really hands-on and also good at analyzing and cares about animals, perhaps should be directed more towards being a field biologist. Now, someone who's really good with people and good at communicating and likes to teach or share, they may become a really excellent science writer or a teacher. The way that we're uniquely designed then helps us find our opportunities. Now, these same questions apply to research. How we answer 1 and 2 should help us discover the answer to 3. So when we think of research, we may think in terms of our identity, what have I been trained to do? What parts of research do I excel at? What parts of the discovery process do I enjoy? Who do I work well with? What types of environments do I work well in? We move to motivation, starting to understand what you want to understand, uncover, or discover. You might ask, what do I want to know? What pain in the world do I want to heal? What problems do I want to solve? What mysteries do I want to uncover? What intellectual problems interest me? Now, how do the answers to those 2 then shape the future? It can be a bit like putting together a puzzle. Starting to see the aspects of research that you enjoy and the questions you want to solve help design out those opportunities and research focus. For example, someone trained in and who excels at statistics and enjoys solo data analysis and writing and wants to solve problems should likely focus more on the technical aspects of research. And that can be applied then in many different areas. But what about our career? We might ask again, how do we focus not just on what we want to be eligible for, but what are we suited for? What would we enjoy? When we're working on things we enjoy, we're far more engaged, and that gives us better results. So what activities do you actually enjoy doing? Who do you like to be around and to work with? What types of people? Do you prefer to be around the heady, intellectual types or those who want to engage with the world more? What types of environments do you thrive in? What tasks do you enjoy the most? What doesn't feel like work? And what does? Considering what motivates you then, are you driven by a specific cause? And if so, what causes are you passionate about? Or are you driven to accomplish something, to demonstrate something? What types of work then speak to you? And how do those answers shape your future? Bringing those lists together then should give you multiple opportunities for how you should shape and focus the career that you're seeking out. Now, how do these questions impact then our broader lives? Who we are as people encompasses all of these previous areas, the choices that we made or make in college just for what we do, the research we conduct, and therefore the jobs that become careers. But when who we are in our lives is that same core person throughout these areas, we feel the happiest, perhaps the most at peace, or perhaps the most successful. It's then about how we integrate all of these different areas of our lives together. So turning again to the questions we might ask outside of a specific job or outside of a specific career, who am I? What ideas do I value? And what communities do I want to be part of? Who do I want to be surrounded by? And what beliefs really matter to me? In a larger way, you may then consider how your motivations are playing out in your life as well. What are the themes that you can identify behind those drives? Is it to help, to learn, to achieve, to communicate? Bringing together what makes you you, those values, ideas, beliefs, the communities, combining that with your larger motivations then bring about that integrated future where you don't have to compartmentalize who you are from what you do. But what happens when there's a mismatch between these answers? When there's a mismatch between who you are and your motivations and then the path that you're on, whether college, research, career, or life, this is where there will be discomfort. Now, it may be intellectual discomfort or perhaps a frustration with the work itself. Perhaps it's a feeling that you simply aren't doing what you're, quote, meant to do. This leads to job dissatisfaction, changes in career, turnover on jobs, and perhaps general life dissatisfaction. Now, when there's this mismatch, it's easy to then start looking for what went wrong. You might think, perhaps I just need additional training, a different degree, or perhaps the problem was with the people I worked with. And yet a different job, more training, may still leave us feel like something is off. So a good approach is to work through those three questions and re-examine to find the mismatch. Ask, how did I allow the first two answers to shape my future? And what is off that I can now address? Now, when there's alignment between the answers to these three questions in your life, your research, your career, this is when you might feel the most settled or feel as if you're serving out that bigger picture purpose for your life. When there's alignment between who you are and what motivates you and the types of opportunities you're pursuing, that then matters to your mental and emotional health, but it also contributes to what you can achieve or accomplish. But what do we consider success, and how do we define that success? We tend to hear of success as defined by our achievements. When we graduate, when we publish that first research, when we earn a certain amount of money, when we earn prestige with the fancy job, whether it's the title or the institution. These are the types of things we've been trained to see and understand as success. But what if we instead had more meaningful markers of success for ourselves? What if that was actually doing the things that we were suited for and motivated by? When we had alignment between the areas of what makes us unique, distinct people and what we uniquely can contribute to the world. How would it then change our choices if we believed that success comes when there's alignment between who we are, our motivations, and what we're doing with those things together? Success may then just be the intentional use of how you're designed that nobody else can be. It can then take the form of hundreds of different opportunities, degrees, jobs, or research focus. It's no longer tied to a particular position or a title. It's tied to fulfilling that bigger purpose. Now I'd like to move into a bit more interactive portion of the workshop. I want you to go ahead and take a moment and think for yourselves, and then start filling up the chat box with your answers. And because we're at this point a small enough group, we can even just turn on your video, unmute yourself, and jump in. And then we'll call on you to interact together. So as you think of some aspects of your identity, start to throw into the chat answers to some of these questions. What are some things that describe you as a person? So some of my examples from earlier, I'm an achiever, adventurous. So what are you? Go ahead and start to add some of those in the chat area. Perhaps your family identity is what's important to you. Go ahead and add, are you a daughter, a sister, a parent? What about your religious identity? Christian, agnostic, Muslim? What about professional identities? Student, professor, mentor? Go ahead and start to fill the chat areas then with the skills that you might have or some aspects of your cultural identity that are particularly important to you. Or perhaps your other identities, such as around your curly hair or perhaps your lack of hair. All right, Karen, I see some answers coming in here from you. A Christian, a relator, someone who cares deeply about other people's well-being. What about some others? I see your faces. Laird Edmund, Leslie, it's so great to see you. Go ahead and start throwing some answers in there, or else I will just start calling on you to unmute and jump in. What are some aspects of your identity?
Rebecca, I'm going to be talking about this in a session this afternoon, so I don't want to steal my own thunder.
All right, I'll give you a half pass then. Why don't you give us one aspect, and we can also promo your session, one aspect that you'll be talking about.
I'll be talking about my passion to reconcile the areas of science and faith, both for myself as well as for my students.
Awesome. So Laird, I see you've added foundationally, it's about your faith and that's a key part of your identity. Also a husband, a father, and a kick booty grandpa. Love that. All right, so what about your social context? Who's important to you? What groups do you want to be a part of? And how does that impact then who you want to be? You might start to list some of the important people in your life, whether by name or by the role that they play, some of the influential people in your life. And then we'll start to think about what qualities those lists of people have in common. So add to the chat area or unmute yourself and jump in with some details about your social context. Right, I see we've got a married, middle-aged Christ follower, a parent, a reluctant nerd, an overeducated, slightly redneckish person among us. Now, Bill, what might you add that describes your social context?
I don't know, Rebecca, is it okay if I talk rather than write?
Absolutely, yep.
Social context is strange for me. And it's very strange having social context be 80% staring at a computer screen these days, right? But social context and motivation are strange because, and I'd like to get your input on this actually, because I find myself devoting hours and hours and hours every day to things that in my own personal narrative of myself, I don't actually enjoy doing. So I'm director of a major research institute at Stanford, and there are parts of that job that I like, but so much of the administration that falls into my lap, I find it stressful, anxiety producing. I'm not really good at managing at a high level, although this institute has been very successful under my directorship for the last 7 years, and I seem to be good at it, and I seem to work at it all the time. And a psychologist just looking at my behavior would say, you're motivated to do that. But my personal narrative is that I'm not highly motivated to do that. And I experience this inner conflict between, the enjoyment perspective and my narrative about what I enjoy versus what any objective observer would look at my behavior and infer about my motivations. So what is the deal with that, and how do I think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different components there. There's the eligibility of the things that you are trained to do and then enjoy doing, adding in that suitability. Then there are the things that you're eligible for. You've had experiences that have led you to be this director, but there are certain aspects of that role that perhaps you're not as eligible for. You don't have that skill, that training in, I believe you mentioned management for one of the examples there. So there are elements of the role that both fit you and don't fit you. And there's elements of the role that you enjoy and you don't enjoy. Now, one of my favorite business professors has said, if you enjoy 6 out of every 8 hours of your job, you are in your dream job. Never let it go. And that in every job, there are aspects of it that are work. That's why they pay you to do it. Nobody likes every single aspect of their job. That doesn't mean that the job isn't a good fit. But when it starts to get off is when that proportion or ratio starts to get out of balance. And so if the things that are causing you frustration and anxiety start to become the 6 hours for the long term, there's obviously seasons of things where it may be that way, but over the long term, if the 6 hours is the work and the things you don't enjoy, and only 2 hours are the things that bring you life, that you feel good at, that you love, then it might be actually time to examine, is this the role that I want to be in long term? Or what ways could I change this role? You might consider then, could I bring in an assistant director who's doing the administration role? Could I restructure the role to where I move into what they sometimes call the executive director? I'm doing the vision, I'm doing the experience, the content expertise, but we have a different director doing the day-to-day. Those are things that then you would want to try to explore, which of course in institutions are filled with bureaucracy and things you can and can't control. But I would question, it's not necessarily about the motivations there, but that fit between the things that you enjoy doing, the things that you don't enjoy doing, and the work that you're actually being asked to do every day, day in and day out.
Thank you. I'm definitely looking for the off-ramp, but my job is to find my successor. I'm working on it. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah, thanks for interacting, Bill.
Rebecca, one of the things that you laid out here with the questions sort of resonates pretty well with me, because I have found in my sort of research career, I spent 10 or 12 years working on research that I was interested in, but didn't feel life-giving, and I finally got just bored with it. And then I started doing research in another area in cognitive science of religion, and that just became so fascinating, particularly because I knew I could tie that into the other parts of my life that are so important. And then I just became far more productive and enjoyed it. And that's one of the things now when young faculty ask me, how do you do research at a small college? And I say, find something that just turns you on, that fits your mission in life. And then the research will kind of take care of itself, because it's what you do for fun.
Yes, exactly. I mean, what a great segue to the next slide about what the answers to those first two questions tell us about our future and how that informs then the choices that we're free to make that to others may not have looked like success. Working at a small institution for some is not success, but when you've aligned around what you really want to do and what you're motivated by, that can be and is success. And it gives you then freedom to make new choices and to redefine the work that you want to do. So what are some other things that anyone in the audience has realized that these first two questions should tell you about what you can do or should be doing with your future? I've got a couple people here still with no camera on, which is completely fine. But if you'd like to just add into the chat some thoughts that you have, you're also welcome to just unmute yourself and jump in. Sometimes that's easier. And thank you, Laird, for sharing that. All right, so we've got a few minutes left here before the end of this workshop. And I've got 2 slides left. The last one is just Q&A time, so we can move into that whenever we're done with this one, with the time we've got left. But I always love to get a reaction. Sometimes in looking at especially personal content, there can be an aha or an oh no, some of maybe what Bill was sharing, or perhaps a duh, or a big wow, I hadn't thought of that before. Or maybe I need to do some more thinking on that. So I'd love for each of the participants who are in the room to either unmute yourself or add to the chat just a reaction, and you can pick any of those bullets that you want to go through related to the content we've been discussing.
I think it gives me kind of a moment. With my students, I kind of put together a Venn diagram of 3 circles that overlap, one representing their talents or abilities, another representing their passions, and a third representing opportunities, and kind of encourage them to go through kind of getting to know themselves and figuring out, what their passions are, what their talents are, and, always with the kind of idea that, we all have things that we're good at that we do not like doing, and vice versa, things that we like doing that we're no good at, right? And so finding that sweet spot is kind of a first step in the right direction. And then the overlap with opportunities that come along that match that sweet spot. But you've given me some more things to think about in terms of how to flesh that out a little bit more for the students to work through.
Great.
So thanks.
And I see over in the chat, we've got Karen saying meaningful, Justin saying, Andrew saying, oh yes. So would the 3 of you like to unmute and add any more? You of course don't have to, but you're welcome to flesh out your response by unmuting if you would like.
Hi, Andrew here. So I guess life kind of got in the way of, I found my passion earlier in life. I found photography, and so I kind of pursued that for a while, and now it is my full-time freelance work. But I also had a kid, got married, had a kid, and lockdown, life gets in the way. And so I guess even the things that you tend to enjoy can get tiresome, tedious. And so the yes was just kind of a reminder, just listening to you talk about kind of, going back to the roots, asking yourself who you are and whatnot, and finding your motivation. I've had this vision, this idea of the intersection of faith, science, and photography. And I wanted to get that out there in some format, video, I don't know, a book format perhaps. But the ideas were in my head. It's just a lot of research that I haven't been able to do. Well, I've just gotten distracted really. So the IS is like, oh yeah, it's reminding me I have this thing that I need to do. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Justin, what would you like to share? I see you've got a comment.
Yeah, your presentation was reminding me of a point in my career where I had left the academy, and partly I think I was still suffering under a narrative that's common in a lot of church cultures, where there's this sort of hierarchy of professions, right? If you're a real serious Christ follower, you're gonna be a professional minister, or at least a missionary, or if not that, at least go into a helping profession. But this science stuff, especially basic science, that come on, that's pretty low on the totem pole. And so at a certain point, I ended up leaving the academy and did some professional ministry with my wife. I don't mean she was the subject of the ministry, though I think I was more, but I mean, we worked together doing professional ministry. And, you can feel good about that and you get lots of affirmation. But at a certain point, it became very clear. We were doing youth ministry, but it became clear that there was a friction between, or I think you used the word alignment. There was a lack of alignment between who I was, and in some ways the motivations, right? I was motivated to serve God in this way, but that's not who I was. And so I wasn't all that good at it. And when I was, it was just because of really, really hard work and the grace of God. Because there was real tension there, because that's not my mission field. I needed to go back to being a scholar and a scientist and let that be my mission field. And I just wonder, I suspect there are a lot of folks who grow up in the church that internalize that kind of narrative, and it gets in the way of them pursuing what we're really supposed to be doing or how we're supposed to participate in God's kingdom. So that's what my is about. It's like, oh yeah, I recognize this.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know time is precious, especially when sitting and staring at a screen. I know we're all weary of doing that all day, every day. So thank you for being willing to stare at a screen with me, and look forward to seeing you around at the rest of the conference. Thanks, everyone.